Welcome back to another tabletop review. Today we'll be taking a look at the Sears and Roebuck or Remington Model 812 410 gauge single shot shotgun. This is a review and restoration video. Here we have a Brazilian made Sears and Roebuck 410 single shot shotgun. It's the model 282.510840, the Ted Williams model. It's the same gun as the Brazilian-made Remington 812, the C.I.L. Model 402, FIE Model SB, and the K-Mart Model 151. I'm afraid this one's been badly neglected and it isn't in the best condition at the moment. We've got some pretty severe rust and pitting here, and currently this gun doesn't work. Looks like we may have some water damage on the stock and forend. Because of its condition, I was given this gun for free. While not a high-end firearm, these 410 shotguns were pretty sturdy. They were no-frills, functional hunting tools. I've taken this one apart already to make sure it's worth restoring. There's a lot of rust, but nothing broken, and everything seems to work as it should, with the exception of the firing pin. It should retreat at firing. This one does not unless you press it back in. It's either rusted, corroded. This 410 shotgun wasn't a legacy gun in the first place and may be worth only about $100 at best restored. So let's see what we can do here. This rust and pitting is a bit more than I've dealt with before, but as a cold blading project, I expect to get a reasonable result. Of course, since the pitting is so severe, it's important to accept that there will be some pitting on the final product. My objective here is to restore this old gun back to functional use. I'm not going for perfection. Now let's make sure this gun is cleared first. And by the way, if you enjoy this review, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. This is basically a restoration video, and obviously I've already restored this old gun, so let's take a brief look at it after restoration before we go any further. What do you think? As a project gun, I should say that this Brazilian shotgun makes for a great example of what you can do to restore badly damaged finishes on cheap old guns, even on a budget. Sure, if this was a high-end piece or a valuable family heirloom, we would have taken a different approach or even taken it to a professional. But it isn't. And because the level of damage to the blued finish was so severe on the barrel and receiver, the stock and forend, once cleaned up, were actually not too bad, but water damage to the forend and a rather thin finish have led us to total stripping and refinishing of both wood parts. If you're looking for a gun to practice rebluing and stock refinishing, I highly recommend looking for an old shotgun. One that will still work like this one could probably be had for about $50, and it offers plenty of opportunities for practice. If you don't like the results, you can strip everything and start all over again as many times as it takes. And here's the thing, it offers the real prospects of actually turning out to be a fairly respectable, usable firearm, like this one. By the way, this will only be a brief overview of the restoration process itself. If you want in-depth information on the preparation and bluing process, I suggest you take a look at episode 2023-24. Rebluing steps, tips, and tricks, where you'll get everything you need. What I did and the steps I took are the subject of this video, but I'll also do a bit of review of the Sears and Roebuck 410 shotgun as well. So let's begin there. What do we know about the Sears and Roebuck 410 single shot shotgun? Well, actually, things get a little confusing depending on who you talk to. According to the Shotgun Forum, the Ted Williams branded shotguns were made by different companies during various times. Some were made by Marlin, High Standard, BOITO, Mossberg, Savage, and H&R, depending on the model, type, etc. Some of them were actually pretty good guns. Looking at the right side of the barrel close to the receiver, this one is indeed stamped Ted Williams in script signature. Then Sears Roebuck and Company, Chicago, Illinois, with Made in Brazil as the last line of text. Here's a photo of a pristine barrel on another similar gun without corrosion. Now that's Ted Williams, the 1966 inductee into the Baseball Hall of Fame signature. Winchester and Sears made a big deal of their Ted Williams Winchester Model 200 pump-action shotgun sold in Sears and Roebuck stores as their store brand gun. There was also a plain Sears Model 200 that was basically the same gun, but the Ted Williams was nicer and superior in fit and finish, according to the reports. By the way, the 200 was an alternative to the Winchester Model 1200 pump-action shotgun. But a good question might be, can the same inference be made on this Ted Williams 410 shotgun? On the left side it's stamped 410 gauge 3-inch full with the last line of model 282 510 which suggests it's a BOITO shotgun. I've been told that the 282 51840 is the Sears vendor number and BOITO of Brazil is the manufacturer. BOITO produced these shotguns during the 1960s and 70s. Unfortunately, there are no records to give us an exact date. However, the white spacing trim would certainly be consistent with that era. I happen to own another Brazilian BOITO shotgun. It's a 20 gauge over-under from the same time period, and I would say it's about the same level of quality. It's not great, but it functions. BOITO also started manufacturing shotguns for K-Mart during this era. BOITO is the only double barrel and over-under shotgun producer in South America, according to their bio. On the other hand, we know the same shotgun was also sold as the Remington 812 by K-Mart as their 151, by FIE as the Model SB, and in Canada as the C.I.L. Model 402, and probably by others as well. Although I'm pretty sure they're all the same gun, the Remington 812 and K-Mart 151 were certainly produced by CBC of Brazil during some time. It's stamped right on the barrel of some of these guns. Did CBC also make the Sears Roebuck version as well? Perhaps CBC produced the Sears and Roebuck 410 for BOITO. CBC is a large Brazilian company that's been in business since 1926 and holds the status of strategic defense company, being the primary supplier of Brazil's local military and law enforcement sector. So is it BOITO or CBC or whatever? As I said, it's confusing. Regardless, there are a lot of Brazilian-made shotguns out there, some better than others. Some distributed under more popular names like Remington or Franchi. As far as I know, these Brazilian-made shotguns were basically produced on the cheap, but have historically given good service. Mechanically, they were solid, but their fit and finish were merely adequate. In good condition, they might fetch from $100 to $150 today. So let's get to it. The good news is I've seen actually much worse, and you probably have too if you've searched the internet. There are some really amazing firearm restoration videos out there. Fortunately here, although the firing pin seems a little sticky and the action is a little stiff, this shotgun is functioning from what I can see. I can probably get away with not taking the hammer and trigger assembly apart. That's good because we know, even restored, it isn't worth that much. So I'm going to take it step by step and see what can be done before we get into anything too costly or time consuming. Let's begin by taking it apart. The fore-end just pulls down and away from the barrel. It's spring-loaded. The barrel is just hooked into the receiver, so rotate it down and off it comes. As for the stock, we'll take the butt plate off here, just a couple of screws. All we need is a long screwdriver to loosen the bolt holding it on. And the stock comes away from the receiver. Now the grip cap. And we probably ought to take this plastic trigger guard off as well. A couple of screws here. and I can also remove the screw that holds the hardware on the fore end. And that's it. So now we have the wood parts here for restoration. I'll deal with them later. We have the barrel and we have the receiver, both with considerable rust. I could just start sanding, but there's so much internal rust that I'm going to use a vinegar bath to loosen the rust first. I've got a nice deep Tupperware container for the receiver, but what about the barrel? Well, how about this? A PVC pipe with an end cap on one end. 2-inch in diameter is just the right size for holding the barrel. Note that I've added a plastic wire here to be able to move or remove the barrel if needed. I'll just fill the Tupperware container here. And now the PVC pipe. I'm going to let these parts soak for 1 to 2 days and check on them. When the rust has dissolved enough for easy removal, I'll flush the parts with fresh water with baking soda to neutralize the vinegar. Then again with fresh water with a little dish soap. Then with fresh water again. I like to use vinegar because it's cheap, safe, it works, and it's easy to dispose of. After wiping down, I'll heat the parts to help evaporate any leftover water. Once rinsed and dried, spraying all parts, especially moving parts, down with WD-40 will help to displace any remaining moisture. So we'll check back on the vinegar bath tomorrow. Here we are 2 days later. 1 day wasn't enough, but I think we're ready to remove the parts from their vinegar bath now. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, you can see the vinegar has done its thing. So let's move on here. After neutralizing, rinsing, and drying the metal parts, we're ready to scrape the remaining rust residue off. The receiver turned out the best. While pitting is really horrible, not much rust remains. Brushing with the stainless steel brush cleaned it up. But here's the thing. I see surface rust starting almost immediately after it dried, so I'm going ahead and spray it down with rust preventative oil right away while I deal with the barrel first. As for the barrel, most of the heavy rust is gone, but there's plenty of deep pitting. Really deep pits can be dealt with if you have some welding skills and the right equipment. I have neither. So all I can do is the best I can with wet and dry sandpaper. What will happen is it will smooth the surface out, but there will be pot marks. It will look better once we re-blue, but otherwise I can't do much about that. Rust eats away at the metal, so it is what it is. I've started with coarse 60 grit wet dry paper, and even that is leaving quite a bit of pitting. I've been sanding for what seems like forever. It's not great, but I'm just going to move on. I'm moving on to 80 grit paper. Now 120 grit. Now 220 grit. Now 320 grit. Now 400. .800 grit is next. And now we have 3000 grit. Let's finish up with 0000 steel wool. Obviously there's still a lot of pitting. I know it looks awful, but bluing will help. We just need to accept that it won't be perfect. The last step before bluing is to clean and degrease the surface with denatured alcohol. I've got just enough birchwood super glue left over from the other jobs for this project. I'm not promoting birchwood products, it's just what I have, but other brands will probably work just as well. As you can see, the reaction is almost immediate. The instructions say to leave it work for 30 seconds, but I found if I leave it on for as long as I can see a reaction, it seems to give me pretty good results. It may not be any better than the 30-second instruction, but it doesn't seem to hurt to leave it on longer either. I've let the bluing on for about 5 minutes here. I'll wipe everything down with clean water next, then buff lightly with fine steel wool. Now I'll add a second bluing. I'll do this 3 times. The instructions say you can continue to repeat for darker results, but the benefits seem to diminish after 3 coats in my opinion. Okay, after the final buffing with steel wool, I'm ready to apply a coat of oil and let set overnight. Oil helps to cure the bluing. I did the barrel first because it was really the worst. I wanted to see if the rest of the gun was worth putting a lot of effort into. I'd say it's questionable. It's certainly better than it was, but quite frankly, this gun needs a new barrel if appearance is important. But at about $100, I don't think that's going to happen. As for the receiver, the pitting is bad, but not as bad as the barrel, but it's still bad. I know pitting will remain, but let's see what we can do here. I already tested a small area for bluing. It looks like it's going to be just fine. I'm going to start sanding with 220 grit wet dry sandpaper because the surface has a lot of flat areas. I'm using a sanding block. Okay, that didn't work at all. I've gone to 80 grit paper. After sanding with progressively finer paper and finishing with steel wool, I'm ready to clean it off with denatured alcohol. Again, bluing reacts immediately. Reaction seems to stop after about 2 minutes with the receiver. By the way, I've cleaned up the trigger guard, screws, and other parts earlier. Alright, it's the next morning and I'm checking in on my bluing, first the receiver. You know, I think it turned out pretty good for what it is and the condition it was in. And the barrel looks a lot better too. Sure, close up we see the pitting, but remember how badly rusted the gun was. And as I said, it was never going to be perfect. There's just too much damage. I've wiped some mossy oak CLP on the barrel and the receiver, and I'll keep these metal parts oiled while I work on the wood parts. You know, on closer inspection, the stock and forearm have actually cleaned up pretty well, except for water damage on the forearm. No cracks or big scratches or dents. The wood looks like walnut, but note that the forearm and the stock don't match in color. The forend is much darker than the stock. It's the wood. I would guess that they didn't come from the same block of walnut. Again, this is a low-end gun, so I'm not surprised. Given that the Sears and Roebuck 410 was an economy gun from the start, I'm not going to fret too much about the wood here. I'll just sand the forend and stock down and apply a few coats of polyurethane. No fuss, quick and easy. Sanding involves 220 grit paper to begin with and 400 grit paper after the first and second coats. I've used a foam brush to apply the polyurethane in smooth, thin coats. Here we are with the second coat already applied. I'm not using a gloss finish because a gloss finish is more likely to cause imperfections to stand out. A matte or satin finish will be much more forgiving in appearance. The third and final coat will be sprayed on. I've given it a day to dry. Let's take a look. I've got a very smooth, uniform, durable finish that I think looks great. This turned out better than I had expected. Walnut is nice to work with, but this wood doesn't have the best grain, and the mismatch of the forend to the stock is obvious. Still, not bad. If you really want a more glossy finish, just use a gloss, semi-gloss, or satin spray for the final coat. Once everything is dry, I'll reassemble and wipe the metal areas down with a light coating of oil. Here it is, all assembled. At a distance, the gun looks okay, but there's no escape the damage done by the rust. The deep pitting was always going to be the real challenge. While the bluing has helped, the severe areas of pitting are still visible. But with a bit of oiling, the firing pin is now working as it should again. So in the end, I've done all I can to restore this gun to functional, usable condition, and that's a good way to look at it. Given how bad it was before, I think it actually turned out pretty good for what it is. This is a fairly robustly designed .410 shotgun, so it's probably safe to use Foster type hollow base slugs, but since the gun has a full choke, it probably won't deliver the best accuracy. However, with waterfowl shells or a combination shell for clays, I would expect reasonable performance. As I said earlier, these old Brazilian made shotguns don't have a high value. There are plenty of them out there, and if they are clean and in good working condition, they might fetch between $100 and $150. In like new condition, maybe as much as $200. In comparison, a new Savage Stevens 301 single shot .410 can be had for about $200, and a Rossi .410 for about $150 today. Something to think about. No doubt the pitting has reduced this gun's value considerably, but because it does work, I would guess it would be worth probably between $75 and $100 at the most. Now, before we end today's video, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, be sure to like, share, and subscribe down below. And thanks for watching. This was a review and restoration video featuring the Sears and Roebuck .410 Ted Williams single-shot Brazilian-made shotgun. This shotgun was marketed under a number of different brand names, most noticeably the Remington Model 812 and K-Mart Model 151. Most likely, it was made by BOITO of Brazil for Sears and Roebuck. It's a traditional basic product with mediocre fit and finish, but these shotguns had a reputation for being sturdy performers. I've noticed quite a few of these at gun shows, and it's common to see surface rust. I think the message here is that if you've got one of these, make sure you store it properly and check on it maybe a little more frequently than your other guns. This one was badly rusted and needed restoration, but it cleaned up well enough to make it available for use again, which is probably all that matters. Any weapon you carry is better than the one you left at home. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for my next tabletop review. Until next time, stay safe.